You have 30 seconds to explain why a man with nothing walked into this courtroom in a car worth more than the house you took from him. That was the question the bailiff asked, quietly, under his breath, the moment Daniel Carter stepped through those courthouse doors. Because nobody was supposed to see him like this. Not the tailored suit, not the calm in his eyes, not the black Lamborghini idling at the curb. Behind him, engines still ticking as it cooled. 18 months earlier, this same man had walked out of a divorce settlement with almost nothing. No house, no savings to speak of, just a small apartment, a secondhand car, and custody every other weekend with his daughter. Everyone assumed he had lost. His ex-wife believed it. Her family believed it. Even the friends he used to call his closest, the ones who stopped calling back, believed it. They thought Daniel Carter had nothing left to offer. They were wrong. Before we get into it, if stories like this keep you up wondering how it all ends, hit subscribe. This one earns it. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. Sometimes the person who looks the most defeated is the one who already knows how the story ends. Sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. And sometimes the people who mock a man for walking away with nothing never bothered to ask why he let them believe that in the first place. Wherever you're listening from tonight, whatever chair you're sitting in, whatever the weather's doing outside your window, I want you to remember that line. Because by the end of this story, you'll understand exactly what it means. His name was Daniel Carter. This is the story of how a man who let everyone believe he had lost everything walked back into a courtroom as the one thing nobody expected. Untouchable. Picture this. A courtroom full of people who spent a year laughing at him, going quiet, all at once, because the man they wrote off just stepped out of a car that cost more than their combined salaries. But let me start from the beginning, because none of this makes sense until you understand who Daniel Carter used to be and what he was willing to give up. Daniel was 26 when he met Vanessa. He believed in the version of love his parents had. Quiet mornings, shared decisions, a partnership built on trust, not leverage. He believed that if you gave everything to your marriage gave it back. He believed marriage meant nobody kept score. For 12 years, he ran on that belief. He worked long hours. He built something on the side, something small and private, something he never talked about at dinner parties. Because Vanessa never asked and he never offered. He told himself there would be time, later to share it, time to celebrate it together. Then they had a daughter, Lily. And everything Daniel wanted from life narrowed down to one thing. Her. He didn't know yet that the woman he trusted most had already started keeping score. He didn't know that somewhere in the last 2 years of their marriage, something had shifted in Vanessa, something quiet and calculating, something that would only reveal itself the day she decided the marriage was over. He had no idea that the divorce filing sitting in her lawyer's office already had a plan attached to it, a plan for the house, a plan for the savings, a plan for Lily, a plan for how to make sure Daniel Carter walked away looking like a man who had nothing left to give. He didn't see it coming, because the man hovering his finger over the true story of his own life had already made a choice. He just hadn't told anyone yet. Vanessa Carter was 24 when Daniel met her. Sharp, funny, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make you feel like you were the only person worth talking to. Daniel fell for that. Hard. In the early years, it felt real. They rented a small place together. They ate cheap noodles on the floor because they hadn't bought a table yet. She used to tease him about his old car, the one that rattled at every red light, and he used to tell her one day he'd trade it in for something ridiculous, just to see her laugh. She believed him. He believed himself. What Vanessa didn't know, what nobody knew, was that 2 years before they married, Daniel had quietly started something on the side, a small logistics company. Nothing glamorous. Contracts, spreadsheets, late nights, teaching himself things his college degree never covered. He kept it separate, deliberately. He didn't want Vanessa to marry a business. He wanted her to marry him. So when the company started to grow, slowly, steadily, year after year, he never brought it home. He funneled the money back into it. He lived like a man with a modest salary, because as far as anyone around him knew, That's exactly what he was. His accountant used to ask him, more than once, why he didn't just tell his wife. Daniel always gave the same answer. When it's something worth showing her, I will. That day never came the way he expected. Vanessa's family never fully warmed to Daniel. Her mother especially. She'd corner Vanessa at holidays and ask, gently at first, then not so gently, whether Daniel was ever going to amount to something. Vanessa would defend him. In the early years, she believed in him. Completely. But belief has a shelf life when it isn't fed. By year 8, the cracks had started. Small ones. Vanessa began comparing their life to her. Sisters, whose husband had a title and a corner office and vacations posted online for everyone to see. She never said it directly to Daniel. She said it to her mother. Her mother said it to anyone who'd listen. Daniel noticed the shift, but he didn't chase it. He was raising Lily. He was building something he still believed would matter to all of them eventually. He told himself the company was for her too, for their daughter, for a future he was building quietly, brick by brick, without asking for credit. That was his flaw, not deception. Patience mistaken for absence. There was a man named Robert Hale who worked closely with Vanessa during those years. A colleague at first, then something more familiar. Daniel met him twice at company gatherings and thought nothing of it. Robert was polished, confident, the kind of man who filled a room the way Vanessa used to fill one, back when Daniel first fell for her. Daniel didn't see what was forming between them, not because he was foolish, but because he trusted the one person he had built his whole adult life around. He trusted her with everything except the one secret that could have changed how she saw him. By the time Lily turned 9, Vanessa had stopped asking about his work altogether. She stopped asking about most things. Dinners grew quiet. Weekends grew separate. Daniel told himself it was a phase. Every marriage has seasons, he thought. This one would pass. 2. It didn't. One evening, Daniel came home early and found Vanessa on the phone in the kitchen, voice low, laughing in a way she hadn't laughed with him in over a year. She hung up fast when she saw him, said it was a co-worker, said it was nothing. He believed her. He always believed her. That was the year the papers were quietly drawn up, though Daniel wouldn't see them for another 11 months. That was the year Vanessa began telling her lawyer in private meetings Daniel knew nothing about, that her husband had no real assets, no real income, beyond a modest salary, and nothing meaningful to contribute to their daughter's future. She wasn't lying by her own understanding. She genuinely believed it, because Daniel had never told her the truth. And somewhere in a filing cabinet 3 towns away, a company worth more than either of them had ever imagined sat quietly under his name, untouched, growing, waiting for a day. Daniel Carter never wanted to arrive. The day it did, everything Vanessa thought she knew about her husband would collapse in a single afternoon. But that afternoon was still a long way off. First, Daniel had to lose everything she thought. He never had. The papers arrived on a Tuesday. Daniel remembers that detail more than anything else. Not the words on the page. Not the lawyer's letterhead. Just that it was a Tuesday, and Lily had a spelling test that afternoon. And he'd promised to help her study the night before. He read the filing twice before it made sense. Vanessa wanted the house. She wanted the majority of their savings. She wanted primary custody of Lily, citing his unstable income and limited ability to provide long-term financial security. Daniel sat with that phrase for a long time. Limited ability to provide. He thought about the company sitting quietly under his name. Thought about the contracts, the growth, the years of reinvestment instead of luxury. He thought about how easy it would be to walk into that courtroom with financial statements that would end this conversation in an afternoon. Then he thought about Lily. He thought about what a custody battle actually looks like from the inside. Not the version people imagine, where a good father simply proves himself and wins. The real version. Depositions. Evaluators. Months, sometimes years, of a 9-year-old girl watching too. Parents tear each other apart in front of strangers with clipboards. He thought about Vanessa's family, how fast they would frame any fight as Daniel weaponizing money he'd hidden from his own wife. He thought about how a judge might see a man who kept a business secret for over a decade, and how that story could be told two very different ways. He had a choice: fight for everything and put Lily through a war that could last years, or step back, let Vanessa believe she'd won, and protect his daughter from ever becoming a headline in her parents' bitterness. Daniel called his lawyer that night. Her name was Patricia Nguyen, and she'd worked with him quietly since the company's earliest days. "You know what happens if we don't disclose the full picture properly," Patricia said. "You know what it looks like if this ever comes out later." "I'm not hiding money from the court," Daniel said. "I'm choosing not to make my daughter's childhood a battlefield." There's a difference. "There's a difference to you," Patricia said. "There might not be one to a judge." Daniel understood the risk. If he structured the settlement the way he intended, giving Vanessa the house, the savings, primary custody, without dragging the company into a fight neither Lily nor he needed, he would look, to everyone watching, like a man who had nothing. He would look like exactly what Vanessa's mother always said he was. Patricia asked him one more time if he was sure. Daniel thought about Lily's face at breakfast that morning, the way she still asked if he'd tuck her in even though she was old enough to stop asking. He thought about every version of the next 5 years where lawyers cross-examined that same 9-year-old about which parents she loved more. "Draft it," he said. "Give her the house. Give her the savings. I'll take every other weekend, and whatever time I can get. And the company stays exactly where it's always been. Untouched, unmentioned unless it's required." It wasn't required. Not that first time. Daniel walked into the settlement, hearing 3 weeks later, wearing a suit that had seen better years, and said almost nothing while Vanessa's lawyer read out everything he was giving up. Her family sat in the gallery. Her mother didn't bother hiding her satisfaction. When it was over, Vanessa didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She already believed she knew exactly who Daniel Carter was. A man who walked away with nothing because he had nothing left to offer. He let her believe it. He let all of them believe it. Because the alternative was a courtroom battle that would have used his daughter as the evidence. And Daniel had already decided, long before that Tuesday, that there was nothing in the world worth trading her peace for. What none of them understood yet was that Daniel hadn't lost. He had made a decision that would cost him everything on paper and nothing that actually mattered. But decisions like that carry a price of their own. And Daniel was about to spend the next year and a half quietly paying it, alone, in a small apartment 2 towns from the house he used to call home. The apartment had 1 bedroom, which Daniel gave to Lily on the weekend she stayed with him. He slept on a pull-out couch that groaned every time he shifted his weight. Word travels fast in small circles, and Daniel's circle had never been large. Within weeks, everyone he used to consider a friend seemed to know exactly how the divorce had gone. Vanessa's version spread first, and it spread easily because it required no explanation. Daniel Carter had nothing left to give, so he gave up. Even men he'd known for years, co-workers he used to grab lunch with, started treating him differently, polite but distant, the kind of distance people keep from someone they've quietly decided has fallen behind. His old friend, Trevor Bishop, one of the few who still called, said it plainly one night over the phone. "You could have fought harder, man. Everyone's saying you just folded." "I know what everyone's saying," Daniel said. "Doesn't bother you?" "It bothers me plenty," Daniel said, "but not as much as the alternative would have bothered Lily." Trevor didn't understand. Nobody did. And Daniel had made peace, mostly, with the fact that nobody would, at least not yet. Meanwhile, life on the other side of town moved differently. Vanessa and Robert Hale were no longer hiding anything. Within 4 months of the divorce finalizing, Robert had moved into the house Daniel used to pay the mortgage on. He drove a car nicer than anything Daniel had ever owned. He took Vanessa and Lily on trips Daniel could never have afforded on the salary everyone assumed was his only income. Vanessa's mother told anyone who'd listen that her daughter had finally found a man who could actually provide. The implication was never subtle. Lily noticed the difference too, In a quiet way, children notice everything adults think. They're hiding. During one weekend visit, she asked Daniel why Robert's house had a pool. And theirs, meaning Daniel's small apartment, didn't even have a balcony. Daniel told her the truth, the only part of it he could share. Different people build things differently, sweetheart. It doesn't mean one of them built something wrong. Lily accepted that the way children accept most things adults say with confidence. But Daniel saw something else in her eyes. A flicker of embarrassment, of comparison. He hated that more than anything Vanessa's family had said about him directly. He kept working, quietly. The company, still unknown to almost everyone in his old life, had grown through a merger. Daniel closed 6 months after the divorce, a deal that tripled its value overnight. He didn't celebrate. He didn't tell anyone. He transferred the additional funds into a trust for Lily's future and kept living exactly as he had. Patricia Nguyen called him after the merger closed. You understand you could correct the narrative anytime you wanted. One phone call, one financial disclosure. And what happens to Lily when her mother finds out? I let everyone believe I was struggling while quietly building an empire. Daniel asked, what happens to her at school when this becomes the story everyone whispers about? It stays hidden as long as you want it to, Patricia said, but eventually something will force it out. These things always find a way. Daniel didn't believe her. Not really. Not until the letter arrived 11 months later. Robert Hale's business, the one he'd built his reputation on, the one that funded the pool and the vacations and the version of success Vanessa had been so impressed by, had run into serious financial trouble. A partner had defrauded him. Investors were pulling out. And in a desperate move to stabilize things, Robert had petitioned the court to modify the custody and support arrangement, arguing that Daniel's original settlement had left Vanessa and Lily insufficiently protected and that Daniel should now be required to contribute significantly more, based on new information suggesting his financial situation had materially changed. New information. Someone had started asking questions about Daniel Carter's real income. Daniel read the filing, standing in his kitchen, coffee going cold on the counter beside him. Whatever Robert's lawyers had found, whatever thread they'd started pulling, it was only a matter of time before it unraveled everything Daniel had spent a year and a half keeping quiet. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. For the first time since the divorce, Daniel understood that the story he had built his silence around was about to be told, whether he chose to tell it or not. 3 weeks before the hearing, Daniel arrived early to pick up Lily for the weekend. Nobody answered the front door, so he let himself around to the side gate, the one Lily used to sneak through when she forgot her key. That's when he heard the voices coming from the kitchen window, raised in a way he'd never heard from either of them before. You told me his settlement left him with nothing, Robert was saying. You told me there was no additional income to go after. I didn't know, Vanessa said. How could I have known? Because you were married to him for 12 years, Vanessa. You don't accidentally miss a company worth this much. Daniel stopped walking. My lawyer thinks there's more, Robert continued. A lot more. If we can prove he hid this from the court during the original settlement, we can reopen everything. Support, custody, percentage, all of it. He didn't hide it from the court, Vanessa said, her voice smaller now. He hid it from me. Same difference if it gets us what we need right now. Daniel stood frozen by that gate, the same one his daughter used to duck through laughing, and listened to 2 adults discuss his life like a line item on a spreadsheet that needed correcting. What broke something in him wasn't Robert's desperation. He understood desperate men. What broke something was Vanessa's silence in that kitchen, the sound of a woman who once knew every detail of his life, choosing not to defend the parts of him she still understood better than anyone. He almost left without knocking, almost turned around and drove home and let the lawyers handle whatever came next. Then he heard Lily's voice from somewhere upstairs, calling down that she was almost ready, and he knocked instead. The ride to his apartment that afternoon was quiet. Lily stared out the window for most of it, until she finally spoke. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. Mom said you never really tried to give us a good life, that you just wanted things to be easy for yourself. She said it carefully, The way children repeat things they don't fully understand, but sense are important. Is that true? Daniel gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. He thought about the trust fund sitting quietly under Lily's name. He thought about every late night he'd spent building something he never once used to buy himself comfort. He thought about the merger, the years of reinvestment, the choice he made specifically so his daughter would never have to sit in a courtroom while adults argued over her. He thought about how impossible it was to explain any of that to a 9-year-old without dismantling the only story she'd been told about her own family. No, he said quietly. That's not true. But I understand why it might look that way right now. Then why does it look that way? Daniel didn't answer right away. For the first time since the divorce, he felt something close to the edge of losing his composure entirely. Not anger, something closer to grief. The specific grief of watching your own child absorb a lie about you and not yet having the right moment to correct it. Some things take longer to explain than others, he finally said. But I promise you, sweetheart, you're going to understand everything soon. Lily looked at him for a long moment, the way children do when they're deciding whether to trust an answer or file it away for later. She chose to trust it. Daniel dropped her off 2 days later, hugging her longer than usual at the door. He drove home that night and sat in his small kitchen with Patricia and Wynn's number already pulled up. On his phone, he didn't call yet, because somewhere between that gate and that car ride, Daniel Carter had finally run out of reasons to stay quiet. If you've ever had to sit still while someone rewrote the story of who you are, you already know how the next part of this feels. Turn on notifications, because what happens in that courtroom is the part nobody in Daniel's life saw coming. The week before the hearing, Robert's legal team filed a subpoena for Daniel's full financial record going back 5 years. Patricia called him the morning it arrived. They're not just asking for support numbers anymore, she said. They're building a case that you deliberately misrepresented your finances during the original settlement. If they can convince the judge of that, they're not just asking for more support. They're asking to reopen custody entirely. On what grounds? That a father who hides assets from the court can't be trusted to be transparent about anything else, including his fitness as a parent. Daniel sat with that for a long moment. The idea that the very choice he'd made to protect Lily from conflict could now be twisted into evidence that he wasn't fit to raise her. 2 days later, Lily came home from school unusually quiet. Daniel asked her what was wrong 3 times before she finally answered. Some kids said, "My dad is poor, and that's why Mom left." They said Robert's the one who actually takes care of us now. Daniel felt something in his chest go still. Is that true? Lily asked, and this time her voice cracked slightly on the question. He wanted, more than anything in that moment, to tell her everything. The company, the merger, the trust fund sitting untouched in her name, worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. He wanted to erase the look on her face that told him she'd started believing she came from something smaller than she actually did. But Patricia's warning kept circling back. Say too much too soon in the wrong way, and it could be framed as manipulation. A father coaching his daughter before a hearing. He had to wait 6 more days. 6 more days of watching his daughter absorb a story that wasn't true. That night, after Lily fell asleep on the pull-out couch, Daniel sat alone in his kitchen and, for the first time since the divorce began, allowed himself to wonder if he'd made the wrong choice entirely. Maybe fighting from a start would have been faster. Messier, yes. Public, certainly. But faster. Maybe protecting Lily from a courtroom battle had only delayed a different kind of damage, the quiet kind, the kind where a 9-year-old starts to believe her father didn't care enough to build her a good life. He thought about calling Trevor, the one friend who still occasionally checked in, but he already knew how that call would go. Trevor believed the same story everyone else did. Explaining it now, days before it would become public anyway, felt like handing someone a spoiler to a movie he hadn't earned the right to see yet. He thought about calling his own parents, long retired and living 2 states away, but they'd never fully understood the business either. They'd only ever seen their son quietly working quietly raising his daughter, quietly disappearing from the version of success everyone around him seemed to be chasing. For the first time in 18 months, Daniel Carter felt truly alone. Not because he'd lost the house, not because he'd lost the savings, because he'd spent a year and a half protecting his daughter from a story, and that story had found her anyway, wearing a version of the truth that made her father look smaller than he'd ever actually been. He looked at the court date, circled on the calendar, taped inside his kitchen cabinet. 6 days. 6 days until either everything he'd protected finally made sense to the people who mattered, or 6 days until it was too late to matter at all. Patricia Nguyen showed up at Daniel's apartment 2 nights later, unannounced, holding a folder thick enough to need both hands. "I've been doing this a long time," she said, setting it down on his small kitchen table. "And in all that time, I've never seen a client so determined to lose gracefully." "I wasn't trying to lose," Daniel said. "I was trying to protect her. I know that. You know that. But Lily doesn't know that, and neither does anyone else in that courtroom." Patricia opened the folder. Financial statements, murder documents, the full history of a company Daniel had built quietly for over a decade. "This isn't about revenge, Daniel. I'm not suggesting you walk in there to humiliate anyone. I'm suggesting you stop letting your daughter believe a lie that's hurting her more than the truth ever could." Daniel looked through the pages slowly. Numbers he'd watched grow for years, numbers he'd never once used to make his own life easier. "If I bring all this in," he said, "it changes everything. Support, optics, the way people see me." "Already changed," Patricia said, "the moment Robert's lawyers subpoenaed your records. The only question left is whether you walk in there and tell your own story, or let them tell a version of it designed to make you look dishonest." Daniel sat with that for a long time after she left. Later that night, Lily called him from her mother's house, something she almost never did, outside their scheduled visits. She'd had a nightmare, she said, and wanted to hear his voice. "Dad," she said quietly, "are we going to be okay?" "We're always going to be okay," Daniel said. "No matter what happens. Even if people keep saying things about you." Daniel closed his eyes, especially then. There was a long pause on the line. Then Lily said something that stayed with him long after. They hung up. "I don't care if we're rich or not. I just don't want people to think you didn't try." That was the moment something in Daniel finally settled. He had spent a year and a half protecting his daughter from a courtroom battle, believing silence was the gentler choice. But somewhere along the way, his silence had let a false story fill in for the truth, and that false story was the one hurting her now. Protecting Lily no longer meant staying quiet. It meant finally letting her see exactly who her father was, and exactly what he had built for her. Every year, he never asked for credit. He wasn't doing this for Vanessa. He wasn't doing this for Robert, or her mother, or anyone, sitting in that gallery ready to feel vindicated. He was doing it so his daughter never again had to wonder if her father had tried. The next morning, Daniel called his operations manager, a woman named Priya Doshi who had run the company's day-to-day affairs for the last 4 years, while Daniel quietly avoided the spotlight. "I need everything ready by Thursday," he told her. "Full documentation. And I need the car brought up from storage." Priya paused. "The one from the anniversary gift? You've never even driven that thing." "I know," Daniel said. "It's time." 3 years earlier, the board had gifted him the car after the company crossed a milestone he'd never told anyone about, not even Vanessa. He'd parked it in storage and never touched it, uncomfortable with a symbol that felt too loud for the quiet life he was trying to protect his daughter within. Thursday, he decided, wouldn't be about being loud for the sake of it. It would be about making absolutely certain that when he told the truth in that courtroom, in front of everyone who had spent a year and a half believing he had nothing, there would be no room left for anyone to doubt him. He hung up the phone, looked at the folder Patricia had left on his table, and finally, for the first time since the divorce began, allowed himself to feel something other than patience. He felt ready. The morning of the hearing, Daniel put on a suit he'd never worn in front of anyone from his old life, Taylor the week before at Priya's insistence. He drove to the storage facility first, signed a release forms, and sat behind the wheel of a car he hadn't touched in 3 years. It started on the first try. When he pulled up outside the courthouse 20 minutes later, heads turned before he'd even stepped out. By the time he did, in that suit, car door closing behind him with a quiet, expensive thud, a small crowd had already gathered on the steps. Vanessa was one of them. He watched her face change in real time. Confusion first, then something closer to disbelief. Her mother, standing beside her, went completely silent for the first time Daniel could remember. Robert arrived moments later in his own car, the one Daniel now understood had likely been financed against a company that was quietly failing. Robert saw the Lamborghini before he saw Daniel, and something in his expression told Daniel everything he needed to know about how badly Robert had miscalculated. Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. Word had already started to spread. When Daniel's name was called, he walked to the stand with Patricia beside him, carrying the folder that had sat untouched on his kitchen table for days. Mr. Carter, the judge said, the petitioner's counsel has raised concerns regarding a significant discrepancy between your disclosed finances at the time of your original settlement and your current financial standing. Can you explain that discrepancy? I can, Your Honor. Daniel's voice stayed steady. 12 years ago, before my marriage, I founded a logistics company. I built it privately, using my own time and resources separate from any marital assets. I never disclosed its full value during the divorce proceedings because I wasn't required to. It existed before the marriage and was funded entirely outside of it. And yet you allowed the court and your former spouse to believe you had limited financial means. I allowed people to believe what they already believed, Daniel said. I never lied under oath. I simply chose not to correct an assumption because correcting it would have required exposing my daughter to a financial battle I didn't think she deserved to be part of. Patricia submitted the documentation. Merger records. 5 years of growth. The trust, established in Lily's name over a year earlier, funded entirely from company profits. Untouched, waiting for her 18th birthday. A quiet murmur moved through the gallery. There's something else, Your Honor, Daniel said, and for the first time, his voice carried something sharper than patience. The petitioner's motion claims I've been financially negligent toward my daughter. I'd like the court to review Exhibit C, records of Robert Hale's company, including recent financial filings showing insolvency and an active fraud investigation involving a former business partner. Robert's lawyer stood immediately, objecting, but the judge allowed it. The exhibit painted a clear picture. Robert's business, the same one that funded the pool, the vacations, the life Vanessa's mother had praised so loudly, was collapsing under the weight of debts nobody outside their household had known about. This motion, Patricia said, was never about Lily's well-being. It was filed in an attempt to access additional financial resources during a personal crisis. My client's original settlement was generous specifically because he wanted to avoid dragging his daughter through exactly this kind of conflict. The judge studied the documents for a long moment before addressing the room. It appears, she said, that this petition was built on incomplete information and, frankly, questionable motivation. The court finds no evidence that Mr. Carter acted deceptively toward this court or negligently toward his daughter. If anything, the record reflects a father who prioritized his child's emotional stability over his own financial interests. Vanessa sat frozen in the gallery, her mother beside her saying nothing for once in her life. Daniel didn't look at either of them the way he might have imagined years earlier if he'd ever pictured this moment. There was no satisfaction in watching Robert's face collapse, no pleasure in Vanessa's silence, just a quiet, settled relief that the truth finally belonged to Lily too. Outside the courthouse afterward, reporters who had caught wind of the story tried to ask him questions about the car, the company, the sudden reveal. Daniel answered only one. Why did you stay quiet for so long? Because my daughter needed a childhood, he said, not a headline. Then he got in the car, drove 2 blocks, and picked up Lily from school exactly on time, the way he had every single day since the divorce began. In the months that followed, Robert's business filed for bankruptcy. The house Daniel once paid for went up for sale within the year, the pool drained, the vacations quietly forgotten. Vanessa never publicly admitted what everyone in that courtroom already understood. She didn't have to. The story had already rewritten itself in front of enough witnesses. Custody arrangements shifted, not out of punishment, but out of practicality. Lily split her time evenly between 2 homes now, one considerably larger than before, though Daniel never let the new house become the story he told his daughter about who he was. He still tucked her in himself most nights. He still helped with spelling tests. He still drove the Lamborghini exactly once more after that day, the afternoon Lily asked to see it. Laughing the whole ride the way her mother used to laugh with him, years before either of them understood what silence could cost and what it could eventually protect. Trevor called eventually apologetic, admitting he believed the wrong version of the story. For far too long, Daniel didn't hold it against him. He understood better than anyone how easy it is to believe the loudest explanation instead of the quiet one. Lily, for her part, stopped asking if her father had tried. She'd seen the answer for herself. Looking back now, Daniel doesn't describe that year and a half as the time he lost everything. He calls it the year he chose his daughter over his own reputation, and it remains, even now, the decision he's proudest of. If this story moved you, you know exactly what to do. Hit like, leave a comment telling me what part hit hardest, and subscribe if you want more stories like Daniel's, the quiet ones. The ones about people who chose dignity when everyone expected them to fight. Because sometimes the strongest thing a person can do isn't proving everyone wrong. It's staying patient enough to let the truth do that on its own. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.